What is going on, everybody? Today I'm going to be showing you how to replace an alternator on 2001, should be from 2001 to 2005 Honda Civics. I'm not sure if this is the 2 liter or the 1.7 liter. It's not my car and it didn't say anywhere under the hood or on the engine. So you'll kind of have to just pay attention, and if this looks like your engine, then it'll be the exact same steps. It's going to be the same basic steps for either one basically. But so if you need to check your alternator first, I will post a link in the description where you can watch my how to check an alternator video. But again, this is a 2004 Honda Civic. We're going to start by popping the hood, of course. So the first thing we're going to do is disconnect the ground side battery cable. You could have multiple different sizes depending on if they've been replaced before. This is a 7/16 or 11 millimeter I'm using. Tuck that over here, and then we'll remove the positive as well. This one actually looks like a 10 millimeter. Yep. Okay, so the alternator is buried down there. They don't make it very fun to do. Like on a pickup truck, it'd be right here. But so basically the things that we have to get out of the way are going to be your power steering reservoir and the power steering pump. Now, we don't need to remove the lines or anything, but we do need to remove the mounting brackets and kind of lift everything up out of the way. That's the only way the alternator is going to be able to come out. It would help too to either jack up the car and put it on stands, or drive it up on some ramps, because coming from the bottom is going to be beneficial in some parts of this video. Okay, first things first, since we don't even need any tools for this part, I'm just going to grab the reservoir here and just pull up, straight up. You don't want it to cock or anything. You don't want to snap the plastic tabs, but just pull firm, lift up. We got to do this because we're going to have to remove the bracket here that the reservoir sits in. So now we're just got that off to the side. Now we need to remove power steering pump. As you can see, there's a belt going around it, and the tensioner is the pump itself. All right, the next step is going to be to remove this nut right here. It's a 12 millimeter. You can try to use a ratchet with a shallow socket, but the AC line is kind of in the way, so you might have to use a wrench or a ratcheting wrench. Rotate counterclockwise to loosen. May need to spray it if it's rusty with some penetrating oil just to help in removal. Careful not to drop your nut. Now that that's off, we can remove this wing nut here and this bracket. The wing nut, if it's really rusty down here where it threads into this nut, you can spray it with some WD-40 or some sort of penetrating oil. If you need to use pliers or a pair of channel locks to loosen this, you can. It should free up enough to remove the rest of the way by hand, however. I don't know why they used a wing nut. This is the first time I've seen that on a car, as far as for something like this, kind of goofy. You don't actually have to take it all the way off. You can just get it like that so it's loose. And then you'll need a 10 millimeter to remove this bolt. Almost lost it. And then you should be able to just kind of rotate it off to the side and pull this bolt the rest of the way out. That. All right, so the next step is to remove the bottom bolt on the power steering pump, which is right there. And again, it's a 12 millimeter. If you don't have a shallow socket, your wrench is your next best option. Come in like this behind the belt. It's going to be a timely process to get this one out, but if you just loosen it up like I did there, should be able to move the pump a little bit and try to get the belt off so that's out of your way. So now we are on, coming from this angle, and I know it's hard to see, so bear with me, but right here where my finger's touching, you can see there's a round bolt head. That is the 12 mil that we're taking off right now. And once I got it loosened up enough and I kind of rock the pump back and forth and push it, like, so I can shimmy it and put downward pressure on it. You can see that up here the pump has slid down about a 1/4 inch. You can see where it used to be mounted there. It's moved down, I think, far enough to where we can get the belt off. So we're gonna get that out of the way, give us a little bit more room. We can finish taking it off the rest of the way, or just leave it. It's wrapped around the crankshaft still. But now we can get a little bit better access to finish pulling that 12mm bolt off. That's right there. So we're gonna finish doing that now. All right, so again, be careful not to drop your nut. I'm gonna push that bolt back just enough to get the pump up and out of the way. As you can see, the reservoir is attached to it, so just kind of swing it off to the side for now. I'll pull this bolt out so I don't lose it. And I'm actually gonna thread the nut on it too, to keep everything together so I know what hardware goes with what. Now, if you want, you can pull the belt off the rest of the way, which you don't really have to. If you want to get the alternator belt fully off, you will need to pull this one off all the way, because you got to take this one off to get that one off. But we might just flop the belt off and let it dangle. All right, so it's not looking like you have to remove this bracket, but I'm going to, just so there's less stuff in the way. I have better angles to get at stuff, and less stuff for my sleeves to get snagged on and everything. So again, this is a 12mm as well. Just cracked it free with my wrench. Pull it the rest of the way out by hand. I'm also going to remove this 10mm just to get this little bracket or tab out of the way. I'm not even sure what that's for. I think now they're just starting to put stuff in my way to make me work harder. Oh no! Next, we're going to use a 14mm socket to remove the upper alternator bolt. You do not need a wrench for anything on the back side. There's no nut, just threads into this bracket here. Now, you won't be able to get the bolt out all the way. There's a little bit of stress on the alternator from the lower portion still, so we're gonna have to loosen that up before we can get this bolt out. If you look down here, there's another wing nut, and you can't see it from up here, but if you just run your fingers along the wing nut bolt, you'll feel it attaches to another 12mm head bolt down here right under the alternator pulley. As you can see, I have my socket. It's a 12mm deep well. It's on the bolt right now, just to give you an idea where the bolt is. We're gonna loosen that up now. All right, so I've got the bottom one loosened up. As you can see, the alternator can wiggle a bit here. Top one is still stuck in there a bit, so I'm just gonna keep pulling the bottom one out. It's loose enough where I can almost get it out by finger now. Now that the top and bottom bolts are loose, I'm gonna go ahead and loosen up the wing nut to take the tension off and get the bolts the rest of the way out. Again, you can use pliers, channel locks. Feels like I'm getting mine by hand, ever so slowly. All right, if you're still having trouble with the upper bolt, you can use a pry bar against the bracket here and pry on the head of it. It will not come out all the way. It'll be stuck here in this bracket, but it will clear the alternator. So now we just got to get the bottom one the rest of the way out, which the wing nut is fairly loose now, so we should be able to get that bottom one off. Now we should be able to get the belt off. Finagle. Okay. And there's the tensioner down there. Just leave that kind of chill. And now we got to unplug this, pull the boot back. Well, there's part of our problem. The wires are ripped out of the plug. Oh! So to unplug this plug, you just push on the tab here and give it a wiggle. And then if you haven't already popped the boot back here, this should be, looks like a 10 mil or an 11 mil. We will find out right now. It's a 10. Junk. All right, well, after seeing this, it called for one of these. So these are the fielding wires that I was talking about earlier that actually control the output of the alternator. So being that 3 of them have somehow been ripped out of the plug, I don't think that happened when I pulled it out. They weren't that tight. You can unhook this if you're worried about it before pulling the alternator. It's just really hard to get at, especially with bigger hands. So now what we're gonna have to do is try to get a new connector from the auto parts store, or go to the junkyard and hack one off of a car and either with solder or butt connector a new one on, and hopefully the wires are the same coloring, because otherwise we're gonna have to try to find a wiring diagram and see which wire goes where. All right, so I've repaired the connector here. I was not able to find a new one at the auto parts store. I went to the junkyard and I lopped one off, and then I wired it in with some heat shrink tubing. I'm not going to show how to do that. This is just going to be the alternator replacement video. I will make a separate wire splicing video some other time. I'm just going to stick with the main job here. So we're ready to go in with the new alternator now. Now there's always a chance that this alternator is still good. I don't know if it's a combo of, you know, the wires were broken, you know, or maybe this is also bad, who knows. The thing is already out. The alternator's not that expensive. I think it's a reman, I'm not sure, lifetime warranty. So I'm just gonna go ahead and put the new one in right now at this point anyway, with the mileage on this car, so we don't have to worry about it again. So here's the new alternator. Again, I'll post a couple links in the description if you want to buy it online, save some money. I don't know how cores would work that way, but first thing you want to do obviously is make sure your connections are all the same. Make sure it's got power stud on the back. It should have an electrical connector here. I'm just going to go ahead and plug it in and make sure it is the right connector. And it is. And the last thing you want to check, aside from obviously the visual, you know, kind of compare and make sure the mounts are in the same spot, you also want to count the pulley ribs. Make sure it's got the same amount of ribs. Make sure the pulley sticks out the same distance so your belt's not trying to ride sideways. And you want to give it a good spin and make sure it hasn't been sitting on the shelf for 3 years. Don't want any bearing growl. If it's growling, it's junk, return it. So we're gonna fish the alternator down, and just because I'm not sure if the wire got damaged when I pulled it out or if it was already like that, I'm gonna wait to hook up the wires till we get this in place. Our upper bolt should still be in place since it can't come out all the way. Lift it into place. Give her the wiggle. Like that. Get it started by hand. If you have to use the ratchet, do so. All right, now that we have the top bolt started, if you remember, there's that goofy tensioner on the bottom and this goofy looking bolt. So we're gonna put this through the tensioner eyelet, and this will thread into the alternator. You'll probably have to lift the alternator up a little bit and kind of jiggle everything into place, just because it's kind of a tight fit. So as big of a fight as it was, I was able to get the bottom bolt started and the belt slipped back on. I ended up pulling the plastic wheel liner just because it made it easier. You don't have to do this, but as you can see, there's the bottom alternator bolt right there. So it does make it easier, but I mainly just wanted to show you the belt routing here. You want to make sure to put the belt around the AC compressor, which is on the bottom left here, and then around the crankshaft pulley. There's another belt that's going to go here that feeds the power steering pump, so make sure you push the belt onto the second rib, and then it'll go up to the alternator. If you need to remove this, it's just these little plastic clips. They just pop out. You can use like a flat blade screwdriver to pop them out. There's a couple that just run up like this, and then tighten the wing nut right here clockwise to tension up the alternator belt. I tightened the wing nut by hand. I also used pliers just when it got a little bit tighter. You don't want this thing to be so tight you can play it like a guitar, but you do want a little bit of up and down play on the belt, tight enough to where it's not going to slip. Now we can go ahead and finish tightening the lower alternator bolt the rest of the way, which is the 12 millimeter, and then the upper, which is a 14 millimeter. The bottom one, don't over tighten it. It just threads into the aluminum body on the alternator. Aluminum is pretty soft. You don't want to strip it out or you'll be replacing it again. So there should be two new nuts on this power stud for the alternator. You want to remove the outer one, and I'm just going to make sure that the inner one is tight. Use the socket. This one is a 10 millimeter. It could be a 3/8 though, so you have to check. Again, it just threads into the alternator. You don't want anything too tight.
I feel like we didn't pay for it.
All right, now you'll see there's a little cutout in this black piece on the alternator. The cable is going to come in from that direction. So it's going to go like this. And then we'll put the other nut back on. And we'll snug it down. Oh no!
That tastes pretty good.
Gonna push this rubber piece back on, and then plug in our electrical connector. The tab should face straight towards the passenger side. That's the way that the alternator plug should be, so you'll want to hold it like this and push it onto the alternator until you hear it click. It's in a fun spot. And push the rubber cover over that too. All right, now we're gonna reinstall the reservoir bracket with the 12 millimeter bolt. There's a little tab here that should go into this hole right there. Or sorry, this small hole right under the bolt hole. And now we can reinstall the power steering pump that we removed and the reservoir. All right, so we'll take our carriage bolt here, the one with no actual hex head on it. And remember, we're gonna feed this into the bottom bracket. Right there, you can see the slot. Right here, sorry. Focus, there we go, right here. Push it through and start our 12 millimeter nut. Now we'll take our tensioner bolt and feed it from the driver's side to the passenger side for the top mount, like so, and then reinstall our bracket with the angled part like this, our 10 millimeter bolt. Just gonna start it by hand for now. Leave everything kind of loose so it lines up. Feed the wing nut into the upper mounting bolt. Get it at least started, probably halfway through, and keep it nice and straight. And then you can reinstall the 12 millimeter nut for the back side. And we're gonna snug everything up. Not gonna tighten it all the way tight, but we don't want it moving around this much. We're just gonna get it a little bit tighter and then set our tension. Again, this is a 10 millimeter. Doesn't have to be anything too ridiculously tight. Make sure that the two ledges line up. As you can see, this part here where my nail is touching is raised a little bit, so this should sit flush with it like that. All right, now we're gonna feed our power steering belt back down. Put it on the outer part of the pulley on the crankshaft, as well as onto the power steering pump. Make sure it's on there square. All the ribs are lined up properly like that. And now we can go ahead and set our tension. If this is getting hard to turn, you can use a pliers, but you can also kind of wiggle the pump. Sometimes this bolt, the tensioner bolt, just gets a little cocked from the tension. You got to help it out a little bit. So once again, we've got our tension set to where it's not overly tight, but it's not all floppy. So we're gonna leave that there. Now we can finish tightening everything up. I found that for the lower bolt, it's easiest to use a shallow 12 mil with a smaller 3/8 ratchet. And you can kind of sneak it down in here like so. You can just barely get it on there because the pulley and the belt are kind of in the way. Give me it. Now with this one with the AC line in the way and this bracket, I find it easiest to use either a regular wrench or a ratcheting wrench. This is also a 12 millimeter. Now we can reinstall our reservoir. Just slip it down in there like that. All right, now all that's left is to reinstall our positive battery terminal connector. Again, on this specific model, it's a 10 millimeter for the positive. Doesn't need to be anything too ridiculously tight. Don't want to break anything. Reinstall the negative. Should hear everything click, powering on. And this one for me is a 12 millimeter. Now I like to give my battery connections just a good wiggle, just to make sure, because sometimes when they wear out, you can tighten these till they bottom out and it still doesn't pinch them enough. You can still wiggle them real loose on here. You want to make sure that these are nice and tight, because you'd be amazed at what kind of problems you can run into with just the simplest electrical issues such as loose battery connections. Now we'll move all of our tools out of the way and start the car and see what the alternator is putting out. And since I have the alternator all buttoned up with the rubber covers over everything, I'm not going to check it there. I'm just going to check it at the battery again. I know my connections are tight. As you can see, our new alternator is putting out 14 volts. So we're good. This issue is resolved. If this video helped you out, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe for more videos like this, and make sure to check me out on Facebook at Tony the Truck Guy. Thanks for watching.